Hi everybody, I'm Jim. Welcome to the channel. I just got back from the Newtown Square Public Library. They had a book sale today in my area. They're about 25 minutes away from here. I usually go every spring. They also have a fall sale. I'm going to try to get to the fall sale this year too. This is my second book haul video of the season. And it might be one of the last of the season. We'll see. But I do like this sale. It's in my old stomping grounds of Marple Township, Newtown Square. And it always is nice to go back, and things kind of look familiar, you know, how at home is. And and it's not like an overly large book sale, but the prices are really good. You know, paperbacks were $1, hardcovers were $2, CDs I think were $1, DVDs I didn't buy any, so I can't remember what they cost. But everything was like very affordably priced, and they have a pretty good selection. This is the first day of the sale. I got over there about 3 hours into the sale, so some stuff probably had been picked over already, but I found some stuff, and it was just fun to go out. My better half went along this time. Didn't go to the library sale. I dropped her off at Michael's. She wanted to shop for art supplies, and there's a shopping center and just not too far from the library. So I dropped her off, went back to the sale, spent about a half hour looking at books, got some things, spent $11.50 on a bag of books, which I'm about to show you, and then went back, picked up Stacy, got some bagels, and came back home. So without further ado, here are my finds. I'll just kind of share the books and a little bit about why I picked them up, what associations I have, is there any backstory. We'll read some blurbs, and you know the routine. We'll start with this book by John Steinbeck, The Pearl. This looks really familiar to me because I'm sure I read it in junior high school. I want to say 8th grade, Marple Newtown Junior High School. A timeless and unforgettable novel of men and women and good and evil. Small blurb here, worth reading. It's a very short novel. Well, we call it a novella. By John Steinbeck. The Pearl is an enduring and classic fable, sensitively told in simple and beautiful language. It is the story of a fisherman who found a pearl beyond price, the pearl of the world. With the pearl, he hoped to buy peace and happiness for himself, his wife, and their little son. Instead, he found that peace and happiness are not to be purchased. They are themselves pearls beyond price. The Pearl is a book to be read many times and cherished forever by the author of The Red Pony and The Moon is Down. So yeah, I'm sure I read this. I don't have vivid memories of it. I think this will be a quick read. I do want to read it soon because Steinbeck's been on my mind. I read Travels with Charlie in December, January, and liked it quite a bit. It's good travel literature. And then just the other day, we were watching on the AMC channel on cable television the film East of Eden, starring James Dean. They're running a lot of like Oscar films this month, so there's like a lot of good stuff. We watched On the Waterfront, and then just the other day we did East of Eden with James Dean, and you know, I had never seen that film all the way through. I've seen some parts of it and seen some of the famous scenes. I'll tell you, James Dean, you can't take your eyes off him. He just has such screen presence, and like the physicality of his acting. He really owned that film. It's a great picture. Very well shot too, like in the sort of letterbox format. And anyway, I enjoyed it a lot. And so Steinbeck's been on my mind, and here, lo and behold, this one surfaces, and I have a little bit of a memory from my school days with it. So for a book, I thought, why not? Next up, Saul Bellow, More Die of Heartbreak. This is a mass market paperback, and let's talk a little bit about mass market paperbacks. So I'm seeing reports in the press that they're phasing these out. Why are publishers getting rid of the mass market size? They're going to still publish trade paperback size, I'm sure, but why? What's wrong with this? I'm going to really miss these when they're gone. So I've kind of had my eyes out for these, and I keep getting a little reminders from when I watch other booktubers. So I was watching Phoebe at Library of Phoebe, and she had a recent haul where she got sort of a stack of mass market paperbacks and some good vintage copies. I enjoyed her video. I'll link to it in the show description. And she was talking about this issue too, and how she's kind of like into the mass market paperbacks. And I know people like Steve Donahue. He has a whole bunch of them, and so many others. So I used to have this book. I think I had it in a hardcover edition. I never read it. I unhauled it long ago, maybe 5 years ago or more, but couldn't resist this for $1, and it's in very, very good condition. And I'm currently reading The Adventures of Augie March on my ebook reader, the Kobo, and I'm actually making like some steady progress with it. So Saul Bellows has been a little bit on my radar lately. So what's this one about? Kenneth Trachtenberg, narrator of Nobel Prize winner Saul Bellows' 10th novel, is a witty, eccentric Russian literature nut who leaves his native Paris to be near his famous American uncle, Ben Crater. Uncle Ben is a world-class genius in botany, but a total duffer about women. Now his erotic escapades and disastrous marriage are about to lead him and Kenneth into a wonderful romp through America's mind-body dilemma and into a Bellovian masterpiece of great wisdom and good fun. Well, maybe I'll give this a shot after I finish Adventures of Augie March, which I still have a long way to go. Now for something completely different, let's talk about the one CD I bought. I'll just sneak in a little music here. This Grover Washington Jr. Wine Light. This brings back a lot of memories. It's total nostalgia play. 1980 this came out, and the big hit off this was the song Just the Two of Us, which features the vocals of Bill Withers, one of my favorite soul singers. I've been listening to a lot of Bill Withers lately, and this song is on one of my playlists, and it came up just the other night. So, when the library sale surfaced this, couldn't resist it. And yeah, this will be fun. Grover Washington's a good saxophone player. I think he's got some Philadelphia connections too. I can't remember if he's from Philly. But this was very popular back in the day when I was in high school, and I really like that song, Just the Two of Us. I can always give that a listen. All right, back to books. Speaking of mass market paperbacks, this I thought was a kind of a cool find. I don't know anything about it, but I was surprised to see that it's in mass market paperback. It's beat up copy, but I just snatched it up right away. It's called The Coming of Age, Simone de Beauvoir. How about that? Isn't that something? A fierce indictment of society's indifference and cruelty toward old people. Wow. She is the author of The Second Sex and A Very Easy Death. So here's just a brief sort of blurb. One of the world's greatest writers asks, are the old really human beings? That's a provocative question. Judging by the way our society treats them, the question is open to doubt, since it refuses them what they consider the necessary minimum, and since it deliberately condemns them to extreme poverty, to slums, to ill health, loneliness, and despair. It asserts that they have neither the same needs nor the same rights as other members of the community. As I said, it's a fierce indictment of society's indifference and cruelty toward old people. That was by Elizabeth Hardwick of the New York Times. Now, when did this come out? 1970. 1970 was the Warner Books edition. English translation 1972 by Andre Deutsch. You know, I don't think I've read anything by Simone de Beauvoir. At one point, I think I had a copy of The Second Sex, and then when I was downsizing my college office as I took the buyout and was about to leave, I think that one was given away. There's a whole bunch of books I got rid of, clearing out my office. Anyway, to find this in mass market paperback, I thought was pretty cool. Yeah, so that ups the tally of mass market paperbacks if you're keeping score to 3 so far. Let's turn to the trade size. Where are you going? Where have you been? Selected early stories by Joyce Carol Oates. I've never seen this particular cover before. It's published by Ontario Review Press. You know, Joyce Carol Oates is a terrific writer, still with us. I'm just trying to understand what this selection consists of. Published in 1993. Yeah, here's the table of contents. I'm not going to read all the titles. I did read a collection of her short fiction in a mass market paperback edition 2-3 years ago, and I forget the title of that book, and I don't think it's exactly the same as this. This looks like a different selection. You know, this is one of our most prolific writers, so she's probably written hundreds of stories by now. But this just is a sampling of books from 1963, 1966, 1970, 1972, 1974, 77, and some uncollected stories. So I thought this is a very clean copy, and yeah, looks like a good one. The edition that I read was clearly a vintage paperback that was probably published in the early 1970s. So, you know, we're getting some more Joyce Carol Oates here. That was a cool find. Now, on to another trade paperback. Look at Me by Anita Brookner. Now, I grabbed this because I have read one Anita Brookner novel, and I can't remember the title exactly. I think I read the debut, it's called, and I hope I wasn't this one, but I just threw it in the bag of it's literary fiction. Here's Anita Brookner. This is a vintage contemporaries edition. She was a British writer. She won the Booker Prize in 1986 for Hotel du Lac, and I really did like that book, The Debut, I think it was called. Now, it's not even listed among these novels. So anyway, let me read the back, and I can tell you for sure whether I've read this before. And I don't even remember if I still have that book. I think I picked up a couple of Anita Brookners, and I haven't looked at the library to see if I still have those copies. But anyway, she was definitely a writer I wanted to come back to. So here's what this is about. The spectacle of two people's happiness is always something of a magnet for the unclaimed. That's a quote. Thus claims Fanny, a solitary librarian whose good manners and tart wit conceal a profound and particular heartache. The two happy people are Nick and Alex Fraser, a couple so dazzling that they seem to vindicate Victorian theories of natural selection. In this flawlessly observed novel, Anita Brookner explores the gulf that separates people like Nick and Alex from people like Fanny, the gulf between those assured of love and those condemned to yearn for it. That sounds like a good premise, and I don't think this is the book that I read before. As a captivated Fanny enters the Frasers' orbit and that of their highly eligible friend James, Brookner reveals the terrible price of their affection, as well as the point at which Fanny will be unwilling to pay it. Exquisitely nuanced and as finely balanced and sharply honed as a throwing knife. Look at Me is a classic tale of hope and disappointment told by a contemporary master. You know, what I remember from the book I read by her was she's she sort of writes small, like in the sense of like private lives, like sort of small, intimate, not grand epic novels, but sort of like slice of life, or just kind of like a contained type of environment with like a small cast of characters. And she is very observant and sensitive. And that sounds like a book that I would like. Here's the only hardcover I picked up. Don't know a thing about it, but I kind of like the author and I want to read more of them. And it's Isaac Asimov, Nemesis. Nemesis. I usually prefer science fiction in paperback, but hey, whatever. I'm going to give this a shot. So this was published in 1989. Let's read what it's about. Of course, Isaac Asimov needs no introduction in the sci-fi world, but the premise here is it's AD 2236. Earth and its 100 space colonies are crowded, anarchical, socially degenerate. Sounds like 2026. Some 2 light years distant, hidden in a corner of the galaxy, burns a star that neighbors Earth's sun, a star that supports its own burgeoning planetary system. Megas, Erythro, and Rotor, a renegade Earth colony. The star is named Nemesis. When Nemesis was discovered, it was seen as the last hope for the human race, a starting over point for a brave band of adventurers led by the brilliant, if megalomaniac, Commissioner Janus Pitt on Rotor. Pitt and his loyal followers had secretly detached themselves from Earth's orbit and traveled via superluminal flight to the Nemetic system to establish a new utopia, a society stronger, pure, and ultimately superior to the one left behind. I'm kind of a sucker for these utopian, dystopian types of novels. Now, however, a 15-year-old Rotorian girl has learned of the subtle yet dire threat that Nemesis poses to Earth and its people, but she is prevented from warning them. For Pitt has dedicated his life to ensuring that his new civilization will be the supreme power of the galaxy, no matter what the cost. And he will not let anything or anyone stand in the way. But as Marlene digs deeper, she discovers that Nemesis threatens not only Earth, but Rotor as well. And now it is up to her to save both Earth and Rotor, as drawn inexorably by Nemesis, the Death Star. They hurtled towards sure disaster. That is your premise for Nemesis by Isaac Asimov. You know, one of these days I'm going to read more science fiction at a faster pace. I can't seem to get around to the science fiction I already have. But I'm going to add that to the pile. Here's a book that I bought for the cover. I'm going to show you the cover. I don't really know a thing about this book, but as soon as when it came out, like many years ago, it came out when did this hit the bookstores? Wow, it goes back, well, first trade paperback edition was February 2010. 2010, my God. That's like 16 years ago. I feel like it was more recent than that I started seeing it. But anyway, that's how time flies. This book. Look familiar to you? For some reason, I always found the cover would draw my eye. Like, I'd be in the bookstore and be like, oh, I really like that cover. I don't know why I like it. The silhouette, the orange and black. Hey, I'm wearing my Flyers colors. Like, we sort of match. This was my high school colors, too. The Tigers. Little B, it's called. Over 1 million copies in print, so I guess someone's read it. Immensely readable and moving and affecting story of human triumph by Chris Cleave, author of Incendiary. Washington Post says, Little B will blow you away. Well, what is Little B about? Like, I literally don't know. I just, like, when I found this for $1, I'm like, you know, this book is always drawing my eye. For $1, let's take a chance on it. And I just threw it in the bag. All right. Well, here's what the blurb says. We don't want to tell you what happens in this book. Okay. It is truly a special story, and we don't want to spoil it. Okay. Nevertheless, you need to know enough to buy it, so we'll just say just this. This is the story of two women. Their lives collide one fateful day, and one of them is to make a terrible choice, the kind of choice we hope you never have to face. 2 years later, they meet again. The story starts there. Once you have read it, you'll want to tell your friends about it. When you do, please don't tell them what happens. The magic is in how the story unfolds. Well, they really didn't tell us much about this book. So this doesn't look very long at all. Like it's got some book club questions and discussion questions in the back. 271 pages. And Chris Cleave is a novelist and columnist for The Guardian newspaper. His best-selling novel, Incendiary, was an award winner. Inspired by his early childhood in West Africa and by an accidental visit to a British concentration camp, Little B is his second novel. Okay, so again, sometimes I buy a book for the cover. What can I say? Now, I have been reading that Amor Towles novel, The Lincoln Highway, and I really kind of like it. I'm enjoying that read. Hope to finish it in the next day or two. So it's opening up some more contemporary fiction vistas for me. I'm trying to open myself up to reading more stuff that's been published in the last 20 years or so. And so this kind of falls into that category for me. This is an older novel by Nobel Prize winner Toni Morrison, Tar Baby. And this is billed as a magnificent novel from one of the most acclaimed authors of our time, story of the love affair between a black model molded by white culture and a black man who represents everything she fears and desires. Toni Morrison probes deeply and sensitively into relationships between blacks and whites, blacks and blacks, and women and men, achieving a raw emotional intensity and overwhelming narrative drive. A novel of hypnotic lyrical beauty, Tar Baby reveals all the shades of feeling as it explores the full spectrum of choices facing women and men in a black and white world. And I'm curious when this came out originally. This looks like a reprint. First plume printing was 1982. Okay, so yeah, I just didn't even know where this fell into her oeuvre. And, I read Song of Solomon a couple years ago, and it was one of my favorite reads of that year. It's a terrific novel. I gave it away to a little free library. It was a hardcover book club edition. But boy, it was good. And of course, Beloved is a classic, and I've read Sula. And those are probably the only three Toni Morrisons I've read. I have a bunch others, and this is now added to that. So, yeah, I thought that was a good find. And then let's do two more. This is another book I don't know much about, but the name of the author was vaguely familiar. So I'm like, Jim, just throw it in a bag. I got my ShopRite bag, just throw it in there. And again, I got out of that sale for under $12. So, nothing to lose, right? Anyway, it's called Light Years by James Salter. And this is a vintage international edition. And let me tell you a little bit about James Salter. And I'll tell you if I read anything by him. Actually, they don't even list it. Oh, okay. He's also written Dusk and Other Stories, Solo Faces, A Sport and a Pastime, The Hunters, and The Arm of Flesh. So he was born in 1925. He grew up in New York City, attended West Point, was commissioned in the Air Force in 1945, served 12 years in the Pacific, flew over 100 combat missions as a fighter pilot, resigned from the Air Force after his first novel came out in 1957, and has earned his living as a writer ever since. And I'm going to assume that he has passed away by now, because well, maybe I shouldn't. This is copyright 1975, and this edition came out in 1995. So I think this is the same guy I thought he was. And I might have one other book by him that's not this one that I haven't read yet. But let's see what this is about. I think he's one of these authors that like the critics like, but he didn't get a lot of like popular traction. But you know, a lot of those authors are really good. The ones who are sort of under the radar, and I don't know, maybe he's like just for particular taste. But let's see what this is about. James Wolcott in Esquire says, remarkable, Salter celebrates the silver and golden bitterness of life. Light Years becomes an unexpectedly moving ode to beautiful lives frayed by time. All right, here's the blurb. This exquisite, resonant novel is a brilliant portrait of marriage by a contemporary American master. It is the story of Nedra and Veery, whose favored life is centered around dinners, ingenious games with their children, enviable friends, and near-perfect days passed skating on a frozen river or sunning on the beach. But even as he lingers over the surface of their marriage, James Salter lets us see the fine cracks that are spreading through it, flaws that will eventually mar the lovely picture beyond repair. Seductive, witty, and elegantly nuanced, Light Years is a classic novel of an entire generation that discovered the limits of its own happiness and then felt compelled to destroy it. Well, that's a good blurb. Makes me want to read the book. Joy Williams says, an absolutely beautiful, monstrous, important book. Wow, okay. Lots of reviews up front, so they were really pushing him. Here's Sven Bierkertz in The Nation. He's a critic I usually pay attention to. Says, this novel, explicitly moody, tender, elegiac, details the disintegration of a love and the unraveling of a well-knit life by the hearth. What finally emerges is a narrative that is more thrilling than its cadences, its descriptive felicities, or evocations of character. It is the sense we get in places almost overpowering that its real protagonist is time. Not a long book, and boy, you know, I get these book haul books and I want to read them all right away. That's one I would sort of put on the TBR list. And yeah, I'll let you know if I get around to James Salter. Finally, is a book I've already read, got rid of it, I don't know, decades ago. I've seen the YouTuber Jared Henderson, I believe, talking about it. You know, he has a very popular channel. He's a philosopher. And this comes from the sort of like the media studies, cultural studies arena. And it is a book by Neil Postman called Amusing Ourselves to Death. And I recognize this is the edition I'm sure I read back in the 90s, I want to say, maybe even the late 80s. And couldn't resist picking it up for old time's sake. And it's a book about public discourse in the age of show business. So Neil Postman was a critic, writer, educator, and communications theorist. So he taught at New York University and State University of New York and Columbia. And he published this book in 1985 originally. So this edition looks like it's from maybe 86, if not later. And what's it about? Well, in a lot of ways, Neil Postman, I think, was prophetic about, you know, where we're at these days. The focus here was, though, more on television, which was like the dominant medium of the 80s before the internet came along and swamped everything. So it might be interesting to see how this book holds up now, so many years later. Anyway, here's the blurb. Television has conditioned us to tolerate visually entertaining material measured out in spoonfuls of time to the detriment of rational public discourse and reasoned public affairs. These things are distant memories now. Like when was the last time you thought public discourse was rational? When was the last time you thought public affairs were reasoned? Reason seems to be a banned word these days. In this eloquent, persuasive book, Neil Postman alerts us to the real and present dangers of this state of affairs and offers compelling suggestions as to how to withstand the media onslaught. Before we hand over politics, education, religion, and journalism to the show business demands of the television age, we must recognize the ways in which the media shape our lives and the ways we can, in turn, shape them to serve our highest goals. And the Christian Science Monitor said he starts where Marshall McLuhan left off, constructing his arguments with the resources of a scholar and the wit of a raconteur. I remember it being a readable book, more readable than McLuhan, for sure. And wow, this might be fun to reread, because with so much time has passed since the mid-'80s, so much has changed. And the internet came along, the Telecommunication Act during the Clinton presidency, and all the things that have happened since then. The World Wide Web, Web 2.0, social media, iPhones, smartphones, tablets, everything's just been sort of revolutionized in not great ways for the most part. So it would be mightily interesting to reread this and see what he was warning us about, and see if it actually, was he the Cassandra of his times? Because we certainly didn't listen, and we just kind of went off the cliff. Just as a sidebar here to wrap up, I've been trying, just yesterday I went down a rabbit hole. I'm not reading books enough. I really have to change that. But I was kind of curious to find out, what's going on with this Iran war? And, I'm checking news feeds and Google News and following up different types of sources and trying to account for media bias and political bias and propaganda. And I'm left just at a loss. I really don't know what's going on. For all the noise and the news that's out there, I just don't know what's really happening on the ground anymore. I know I can't trust my government anymore. The default assumption is they're lying. And governments always do propaganda. And the mainstream media is largely propagandistic. And I just feel sad. I feel sad that I can't really figure out where the truth is anymore. And maybe that's just the way they want us to feel. But when I saw this pop up, I'm like, maybe it's time to look at Neil Postman again. I should say I actually saw Neil Postman speak. This was late 80s, early 90s, probably 90, 91. There, my wife and I, we weren't married yet, but we were living in media in Delaware County. And we went down to Baltimore for an academic conference, which was basically about media and communications and pop culture and things like that. So the featured speakers were Mark Crispin Miller and Neil Postman. We saw both of them speak. And Postman was good. He was getting on in years by that point. I don't know exactly when he died. Mark Crispin Miller is still around, and he's, I don't even want to talk about him. He's kind of gone off the deep end, like in directions I don't really respect anymore. That's kind of a sad trajectory, because he used to be a really good critic. But Neil Postman, I never really lost respect for him, and so it might be fun to read him again. Anyway, sorry for the sidebar. That's my book haul. So we got a small stack of mass market paperbacks, mostly trade paperbacks, and one hardcover, and a Grover Washington, Bill Withers CD. That's it, folks. Let me know your thoughts on the books. You can always weigh in the comments section down below. I hope to see you again really soon. Be well. Peace out.